Welcome in, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. So, I got some good feedback on one of my recent podcast episodes and videos on the subtle ways we control, how that ends up causing us more stress and pain, and how to work with that in many different ways. And, I don't always know what people are going to enjoy or get the most out of, but I'm always open to feedback. And this time, some of you provided that and you requested more. So I'm happy to talk more about control. I think it's such a rich topic. It's something that I think if we're a human being, we all struggle with it to some degree. And within a dharma context, if we learn how to work with control in a healthy way, more or less release control more and more, I do believe we can find more genuine peace. And if we're interested in awakening, we can also move more towards that. So I think it's just such a rich topic. So I'm more than happy to say more about it. And in this episode, I decided to say a little bit more about the illusion of control and how that applies to sort of how we perceive chaos in the world and or just, the things we go through in life, right? I mean, I think there's some sense that I can fall into as well, but I see it often reflected in the people around me too, that, pain shouldn't happen to us, or difficulty or surprise or calamity, whatever you want to call it, that things should go exactly as we want, exactly as we expect. And of course, we all, most of us probably listening to this, watching it, we know that's not necessarily true, yet we still fall into that trap, mostly because of expectations, mostly because of how expectations and control work together. So I hope this is helpful, and it is a continuation of my Dharma talk on the subtle ways we control and why it hurts. And so if you haven't watched that video already, you can go ahead and watch that one. It's a recent episode, or you can listen to it. So to move forward, I was reflecting on this idea of the illusion of control. Of course, usually I relate that to myself and how that applies to my experience of, either experiencing suffering when something doesn't go my way, or I have a certain expectation and then it changes. All these types of subtle stress points, subtle points of dissatisfaction or discomfort, I personally experience on a daily basis, at least multiple times. And it's not always a big deal. It's not always like, the sky is falling. It just might be, I didn't get enough sleep, so I'm not as, clear and awake as I'd like to be for something. Could be as simple as that, right? Or maybe my milk to coffee ratio didn't pan out that day, and the coffee's too bitter. Whatever it is, it can be something that might be really silly to you, but to me in that moment, there's a sense of disappointment. And of course, we don't often link up disappointment and expectation with control, but if you really reflect on it, in my opinion, I do believe they're related. This idea of, that we sort of can control the circumstances in our life at all times. I'm sure there's plenty of you out there who don't struggle with that, that much, but hopefully you can still find some things to reflect on from this content and how this might apply to you. So this word illusion is a really interesting one. It's one of these English words that actually meets some of the more esoteric language in Sanskrit and Tibetan. And so it's a good one. Often English words don't fit into a certain Tibetan term, and then it needs to be explained. When we're talking about Tibetan Buddhism, or in the Pali language, I'm sure it's very similar, or Sanskrit. But illusion is really a nice English word, because when you look up the definition, it more or less means literally what we're intending a lot of the times in Buddhist non-duality. That it's something that appears, it's there, it's something you can experience or see, but it doesn't exist in the way you're seeing it or experiencing it. So therefore it's an illusion, right? So often we have analogies in the Western world, like a mirage, right? So if it's a hot day and you look out into the horizon a bit, it looks like there might be water, but it's just the gases and the heat meeting, right, and creating this illusion of water. A lot of the times I think a rainbow is a great example. We often use it in traditional Buddhism quite a bit to describe non-duality, where a rainbow appears, we can experience it, and it feels so vibrant and real. And I don't know that many people who don't get excited by a rainbow. Most people get pretty excited, right? And everybody runs outside, wow, and takes out their phone, takes photos. So it's something very striking because of the color and the beauty and the naturalness of it. And I guess the spontaneity of it is part of it for me too. And yet we're not recognizing it's totally an illusion. If we move slightly one way or we move slightly the other, maybe more than slightly, we move like half a mile or something, you can't see it anymore, right? Or suddenly a cloud covers the sun and then it disappears. So it's dependent upon many things. So an illusion here doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means we're imputing more on it than it is, right? So when we're relating this back to our reflection, this work we're doing together on reflecting on on the ways we can control or put too much expectation or too much rigidity around something, I find this illusory nature reflection to be quite helpful, right? In the sense that control itself is kind of an illusion, right? I don't want to go too deep into the weeds, but there is some interesting dialogues with some modern Buddhist teachers where they're questioning whether free will exists within a Buddhist context. Free will mostly being a Western philosophical idea. Maybe it's Judeo-Christian too. I'm not sure, but either way, free will it can also be a type of illusion. That sort of we are in control of all things at all times. And, most people, I think, recognize that's not necessarily true, right? We can't control a rainstorm. We can't control someone's going to suddenly, rear end our car or whatever it is, right? So there's certain things that just happen. And we can, how do you say, lean into those things. Obviously, you don't have to lean into the most difficult things, but just the nature of how, just weather. One moment we're enjoying the sun and then the next a rain cloud comes. And so there's this illusion of like we can bask in and expect, maybe expect is a little bit better of a word here than control. We can expect a certain outcome. We can expect, okay, I'm going to enjoy the sun for such and such a time. And then it's not possible. It changes, right? I don't know about you, that bums me out. Like, especially like, I like walking in nature, and let's say I only have an hour gap in my workday to go take a walk, and it's raining for that gap. And, I planned it, right? It was there, it's happening. And then it just rained, right? So either I get wet, or I guess I could take an umbrella, or I don't go. So of course we can adjust, but I noticed for me that disappointment is related to this illusion that I have some sort of control. And then of course expectation plays in there too. So here I just encourage you, if you're resonating with this, take some notes or just come up with your own reflections, right? I prefer this content becomes contemplative for both of us, not necessarily like me dictating how things are. And so what other kinds of experiences do you experience that type of illusion, right? So again, in Buddha Dharma, we seek out more or less truth. We try to seek out how things actually are versus how we want them to be. And in order to do that, we have to reflect. We have to bring in examples from our life, maybe the life of others sometimes. And we reflect. So in this case, the best examples, I think, are the ones that come from our own experience. So, this could be an exercise for you of just listing out some of the experiences you've had where that illusion came up. And, what I'm implying here is you believe the illusion, right? Meaning like you actually didn't have control, but you thought you did, right? So make a list of those. It can be quite insightful, right? Again, you can start with last a storm, a rainstorm that happened last week or something like that, or start with something simple. Start with something, I would say, not so triggering, and then you can move into more challenging material and content. Um, I have a 2.5-year-old, and I think she changes more than the weather. So for me, that's a great example because often there's this, we're having fun, she's laughing, we're playing with something, and there's this sense of like, oh, I just wish this moment would last forever with her, and then boom, 5 seconds later, it's just a tantrum for no reason usually, as normal and natural with toddlers, right? So I notice in that for me, there is some element of like, oh, I wish I can control this. Not that I can control her, but the situation that I wish she wasn't, unhappy. I wish she could be at ease, right? So often our notion of expectation or control, it's not often malicious. It's not like we want to control others or we want to harm others. It's often situational, right? Or maybe we want the best for someone and we wish they could come out of a certain mood, or we could have more harmonious conversations, we could have a more harmonious relationship with them. So either way, we can recognize behind some of our maybe habits of control are positive motivations, right? We want to be happy. We want to see others happy. That's also healthy to recognize, because I think when we're doing this kind of, I call it kind of radical self-honesty work, we have to recognize why we do things and not, turn it into a completely negative thing, because then we can get down on ourselves. Oh, I'm always controlling, blah, blah, blah. I'm always, it's not about that. It's not about, who and what we are. It's just noticing a habit pattern and changing it. But often the content of why we do what we do is positive. I've noticed that a lot of the times in my life. It's just we're seeking the wrong way of doing it necessarily. I'm not telling you that, but I know for me, often the ways I seek happiness don't provide that, right? And that's this whole kind of entanglement of what we call samsara, or to circle in confusion, right? In the Buddhist path. And that entanglement causes us to misperceive reality and self. And when we misperceive reality and self, we're often misperceiving a certain action of body, speech, and mind. We're misperceiving that it's going to produce a good result when it may not, right? So this also gets caught up in this illusion of control, because the illusion is that we're perceiving a certain way. And if we actually want to find genuine peace and happiness, we need to question the way often. So I find reflecting on this sense of the illusion of control in my life, it points me back to that. It points me back to reinvestigating based on the dharma, right? That is this going to provide the genuine, lasting happiness I'm actually seeking? And of course, if I know it's not, doesn't mean I still can't enjoy it, right? So I still might eat the chocolate, but I know the chocolate's not going to provide the kind of happiness I need that's lasting. So it's about knowing that. That's the key. Then, of course, applying this to sort of a chaotic world. This is a tough one because personally, and again, I don't mean to impose any of my beliefs or reflections on anyone else here, just kind of sharing and more prompting for you to investigate yours. I don't know when the world has not been chaotic. If we actually study history, there's so many times where there's conflict, there's strife. Things go from semi-peaceful environments in a certain town, city, country to devolving into chaos and sometimes destruction of that country, place, culture, right? And we can see that over and over and over again in history. And it's up to you whether you want to believe that's a good or bad thing. But the truth is, it just is, right? It happens. And so, of course, trying to control that is futile. But again, I think here there's also kind of an invisible finger pointing another way. Meaning, if we if we release control, does that mean we just become a pessimistic, apathetic, all of that kind of stuff? No, it doesn't mean we need to sort of become pessimistic and apathetic to problems and challenges we can see in our life and around us. What we can do is switch our motivation and intention for how we're working with them. We can switch them to compassion. So for me, recognizing, the illusion that I have control, and whatever I'm looking at is also a type of illusion, whatever I'm seeing, whatever I'm perceiving, it allows for a softness of the edges. It allows for first a breaking open to happen where, we all experience pain. We all suffer. We all experience discomfort. This is just something that's inevitable. And leaning into that inevitability has actually quite a few gifts. The main gift is we can actually develop compassion, which is a genuine wish for ourselves and others to be free from that pain. But within that wish, there is also a surrender, but it's not an apathetic, pessimistic, nihilistic kind of surrender. It brings us up, not down. And that's really the power of compassion. And I would say it also encourages wisdom to enter the picture, where when we actually do act, if we need to act, that action can come out of compassion and wisdom, or more compassion and wisdom, and maybe even have a positive effect, right? So there's so many beneficial, I think, outcomes, beneficial things we can experience in our life, and how we can make a positive change on ourselves and others around us through recognizing any type of control is an illusion and releasing that control. And then we learn to work another way, right? So I think I'll leave it there, but just some takeaway questions. Reflect on this in your life. Of course, I was suggesting some of those moments where maybe expectation came in, and then, you had some disappointment or even anger or frustration, the gamut of that. And then here, reflecting on sort of our relationship to the world. Do we tend to catastrophize the world, meaning like sort of the sky is falling all the time? Do we relate to it with some space? Do we cultivate compassion when we bear witness to discomfort or suffering happening in and around us? And, what are we doing with that compassion, right? Of course, I think just compassion itself is enough, because what will come out of that is skillful action, and action that's aligned with others. So I think the cultivation of it, I usually say compassion is more a training in a way of being than a way of doing, because the doing will automatically come if we're training in the way of being. We will act in more compassionate ways. And that'll be aligned a little bit more from my experience, and what the Buddhist path says. It'll be aligned a little bit more with truth, with how things are actually playing out, and with illusion, right? Because illusion doesn't mean we give up. Illusion means we learn how to play. We learn how to flow with how things are, rather than trying to, fix them and box them in and come up with some sort of one solution. There could be one problem, but actually many solutions, depending on the person or situation. So yeah, again, I'll leave it there, but just some reflections for you, kind of more practical ones, and then some more existential ones. I would love to hear from you if again, this is sort of deepening our dive into the ways we control and how to work with that, how to open that up. And if you're watching on YouTube, I appreciate your comments on how you practice this, how some of these reflections are landing for you. If you're listening on my podcast, you can always reach out to me at scotttusa.com. Thanks so much, everyone. Wishing you well.